Megachurches once looked untouchable. They had the money, the influence, the political power, and the biggest stages Christianity had ever seen. But something is shifting. Quietly at first, now loudly, people are walking away. Scandals keep stacking, trust keeps breaking. And the whole system is starting to crack in the places it swore were strongest. Today, we're talking about the rise and slow collapse of megachurches in America. These are the institutions that turned faith into a brand, pastors into celebrities, and sanctuaries into stadiums. For years, these churches defined modern Christianity, but something has gone wrong, and once you start looking at the patterns, the decline becomes impossible to ignore. Like, comment, and subscribe as we explore the downfall of U.S. megachurches. To understand why megachurches are struggling today, you have to understand how they got so big in the first place. In the 1980s and 1990s, American Christianity began shifting from small, local congregations to massive, consolidated churches. These churches built huge campuses with giant parking lots, full production teams, indoor cafes, professional musicians, and branding strategies that felt more like entertainment companies than places of worship. People flocked to them. They promised polished sermons, high-energy music, children's programs that felt like mini amusement parks, and a sense of belonging built through marketing language like "find your purpose" and "come as you are." Pastors became recognizable personalities, charismatic men who knew how to command a stage, build a following, and anchor a multi-million-dollar operation. For a while, this model worked. Attendance grew at astonishing rates. Some churches added multiple campuses in different states. Streaming services spread their messages nationwide. They became religious empires, with budgets larger than many small towns. But the bigger something grows, the more fragile its foundation becomes. As megachurches grew, they adopted structures that looked much less like spiritual communities and much more like corporations. Executive boards formed, pastors became the CEO, revenue streams expanded beyond offerings into books, branded merchandise, real estate, music sales, ticketed events, and speaking tours. With this shift came pressure. A church built to look like a Fortune 500 company needs constant growth to survive. Numbers matter. Attendance numbers, donation totals, view counts, merchandise sales. And when a spiritual institution becomes dependent on business metrics, something gets lost. People start to feel more like customers than members. Pastors start to feel more like brand managers than shepherds. And once a church needs constant expansion to keep the lights on, the focus moves away from community and toward performance. The sermons get shorter, flashier, more dramatic. Worship music becomes a production. Entrances, LED walls, smoke machines. The spectacle has to keep growing to justify the machine behind it. But you can't keep scaling up a spiritual experience without eventually hollowing out its heart. Another major turning point was the deep political entanglement megachurches embraced. Many of these churches became openly partisan, endorsing candidates, pushing specific political agendas, and using their platforms to shape elections. Congregations didn't just receive sermons. They received voting instructions. For some attendees, this was energizing, but for many others, it was unsettling. Churches that once felt like places for everyone suddenly felt exclusive, and not in a spiritual way. People who didn't align politically felt unwelcome. Discussions of compassion and justice were replaced with fear-based warnings about societal enemies, moral decline, and the need to fight cultural battles. This shift alienated a large percentage of younger churchgoers. The more political the sermons became, the faster young adults left. Not because they lost their faith, but because the church stopped sounding like faith and started sounding like propaganda. If I could take a moment to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe, it really helps us out. The business model and the politics weakened megachurches, the scandals shattered them. Financial scandals exposed pastors living extravagant lifestyles funded by church members who were told to give until it hurts. Mansions, private jets, luxury vehicles were the exact excesses Jesus warned against. Became normal among religious leaders who preached humility. Sexual scandals erupted across multiple megachurches, involving pastors, staff members, and sometimes entire church leadership teams, covering up abuse. Victims were silenced, whistleblowers were punished, boards protected their pastors instead of their flock. When stories broke in the media, churches issued polished statements, held damage control meetings, and tried to spin narratives about restoration or misunderstanding. But people noticed the patterns. Every time another scandal hit, the spell of authority weakened. When a church becomes known for protecting abusers or misusing money, its credibility doesn't return, the trust doesn't rebuild, and the decline accelerates. Beyond public scandals, something else was happening quietly inside these institutions. The internal culture shifted in ways that made people uncomfortable. First, there was the rise of image-driven Christianity, a faith built around appearances, branding, and emotional highs instead of service, humility, and community. Church became a weekly performance that required constant excitement instead of thoughtful spiritual nourishment. Second, leadership became insulated. Pastors surrounded themselves with loyalists. Questions were treated as rebellion. Doubt was treated as weakness. Women were often blocked from leadership roles. LGBTQ members were told to hide their identities or leave. Third, the pressure to appear blessed became overwhelming. Everyone else looked perfect. Perfect marriages, perfect kids, perfect finances. Members struggling with real problems felt ashamed, not supported. A church that demands a mask will always quietly lose the people who refuse to wear one. Megachurches built themselves on a model of spectacle. Loud music, big lights, polished branding. They tried to make church cool. But younger generations didn't want cool. They wanted authenticity. They wanted truth, transparency, consistency between message and behavior, spiritual honesty instead of spiritual performance. When they saw pastors living like celebrities, churches running like corporations, and sermons functioning as political speeches, they opted out. Not from spirituality, but from the version of Christianity megachurches were selling. This created a generational break that megachurches are still failing to fix. During the pandemic, when in-person services shut down, megachurches lost their greatest strength, the show. Without the lights, stage, and spectacle, many members realized the sermons themselves weren't offering much depth. Online services made it easy to compare churches side by side. People could instantly see the difference between authentic teaching and empty motivational speeches disguised as theology. Many never returned, and financially, the shutdowns were devastating. A structure that relies on physical attendance and production quality cannot survive long-term instability. Even after reopening, attendance across megachurches dropped significantly, and for many communities, it never recovered. Across the country, megachurch attendance is falling, donations are shrinking, staffs are downsizing, multi-campus systems are consolidating. The era of explosive growth is over. People are leaving quietly, steadily, and permanently. The reasons pile on to one another. Lost trust. Over-politicized sermons, financial abuses, leadership scandals, hypocrisy, emotional exhaustion, disillusionment, a growing awareness of how little many churches resemble the teachings of Jesus. Megachurches built themselves to look indestructible, but they built their foundations on numbers, marketing, and performance, not community, humility, or accountability. That kind of foundation doesn't survive pressure. Megachurches rose by promising purpose, belonging, and transformation. But the bigger they became, the further they drifted from those promises. The decline unfolding now is not a surprise. It is the natural end of a system that grew too fast, demanded too much, and ignored the warning signs for decades. If this matches what you've seen in your own community, tell me in the comments.